Support for Headline Humboldt is made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, a federal appeals court has revived a grower's lawsuit against Humboldt County code enforcement. We'll have the details. Also, geologist Lori Dengler and Ryan Aylward from the National Weather Service join us to talk about the recent spate of earthquakes, what they represent in terms of geophysical activity, and how we did as a community in response. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Living in an active seismic zone represents a number of challenges to a community. Unlike hurricanes, tornadoes, and other kinds of natural disasters, earthquakes can occur at any moment. They are not tied to seasons, to climate, or for the most part, to human activity. So readiness, preparedness, is absolutely key. Part of being prepared involves developing robust systems to respond when an earthquake strikes, to efficiently communicate necessary information to the public, mitigate problems that may arise, and support earthquake victims when that becomes necessary. With our recent rash of quakes, how did we do? Are there any lessons to be learned? Were there mistakes made? What can we draw from these recent temblors that will make us even better prepared when a big one strikes? In a moment, we'll be joined by geologist Lori Dengler and Ryan Aylward from the National Weather Service for an after-action report, and to learn from them as best we can the physics of what actually occurred. If there's a single thing we know about earthquakes on the North Coast, it's that no matter how severe a given earthquake may be, another one is always on the way. How we respond and how we learn from our mistakes helps determine how many of us will survive. But first, the news. A class action lawsuit against Humboldt County's Cannabis Code Enforcement Program and Community Development Director John Ford has been given new life by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The suit challenges the legality and severity of fees levied by the county, and it was dismissed last year after a judge ruled that the plaintiffs, the nonprofit Institute for Justice, and landowners Corrine and Doug Thomas, among others, lacked standing because they hadn't yet paid the fees. The charges were applied for work done on the properties prior to their purchase by the plaintiffs. The appeals court reversed that dismissal decision, saying that while the plaintiffs have yet to pay the fees, they've suffered from distress as a result and have had to pay a significant amount of money to fight the levies in court. The decision was filed on Monday by a 3-judge panel and included the finding that the plaintiffs had made a plausible case so far that the fees were in fact excessive. In an even higher profile, locally relevant court case, lawyers for Providence and St. Joseph Health in Eureka filed a motion this past week to dismiss the state of California's suit against them. The state suit seeks an injunction and even criminal penalties against St. Joe's and Company for allegedly refusing abortion care during obstetric crises. That suit was filed in September by State Attorney General Rob Bonta. In the dismissal motion, Providence attorneys argue that forcing the hospital to provide services it deems immoral would be a violation of constitutionally guaranteed freedoms of religion and expression. Quote, forcing St. Joseph Health Northern California to allow procedures to terminate a pregnancy that are not permitted by the Catholic faith would unquestionably impede the hospital's constitutionally protected ability to communicate its faith-based message that such procedures are intrinsically wrong, unquote. Attorney Harvey L. Rockman argued in the motion. We'll be right back after this short break.
This is the PBS app. It's ready for you whenever you want full episodes of your favorites, perhaps a little history, or the real story, shows with heart, or the latest news and docs. Even stream your local station live. It's all there waiting for you. So download the PBS app now for everything you love and a whole lot more to explore. Stream anytime, anywhere with the PBS app.
Life is complicated enough. Why worry about what to do with your extra car? Skip the costs of maintaining it, storing it, insuring it, or renewing registration. Car repairs? Forget about it. Here's one easy solution to your car problem. Donate it to our station. It's fast, free, tax deductible, and if you donate, you're going to feel incredible knowing you're supporting quality programming. Interested? Just call this toll-free number or donate online. Thank you.
Joining us now in studio is geologist Lori Dengler and Ryan Aylward from the National Weather Service to talk about the recent quake and how we performed in our community response. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
So, we were talking a little bit before the show about the science of earthquakes and of the weather as a meteorologist. And one of the things I wanted to start with to sort of help the next generation of scientists get inspired about what we're seeing in the news with these earthquakes and whatnot. If we could talk about what it is scientifically that you do, and then also what it is about that particular research that inspires you. Ryan, do you mind starting?
Yeah, like you said, I'm a meteorologist, so it was really about, for me when I was a kid, it was all about thunderstorms and learning about that, and so that's what really got me passionate about it. And that's, you could ask every meteorologist, they probably have nearly the same story. It was something in their childhood. And so what really inspires me or makes me excited about it every day is it's really a challenge. You never know what's going to happen, right? And so every single event is different. And so it's all, because of that challenge is always there and you always never know, there's always something fun to come into work to, right? Yeah. So that's been the big thing for me. And then moving into tsunamis and earthquakes, well, once I got the job here, it was just, you had to. I mean, and I've always been passionate for science in general, so I just jumped right into it. Yeah.
The complexities involved with modeling the weather, and I mean, that's just mind-boggling on the surface, and I can imagine it gets even more complex as you get into the weeds. Lori, you're one of both of you guys are the all-star scientists that we call in on these occasions to talk about this sort of thing. But how did you initially get involved in geology and earthquakes in particular? And what is it about this phenomenon that keeps you inspired after your career?
Well, when I was about 7 years old, I was lying down on my parents' bed when suddenly all of the books on the bookshelf behind me collapsed down on top of me. So it made an impression.
I bet it did.
But it was actually many years later that I started going down that path in a more professional way. When I was an undergraduate at Berkeley, I had no interest in science or math. I thought only geeky people did that. We didn't use the word geek then, but no. So I started out in humanities and journalism, and I just didn't connect until I took a required science course that happened to be an introductory geology class. And this was at the dawn of plate tectonics. Yeah. And it was wonderful. And it was taught by a professor who felt that science, well, to do geology, you had to be as appreciative of the aesthetics of the earth as the science, that you really, that it's really the art of the earth. And that's always stuck with me, that we live on a wonderful planet, a wonderful dynamic planet. And we keep learning more about it, and I'm only at the beginning of that learning curve.
Yeah. So there's like a sense of awe kind of that motivates
Absolutely,
your work. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as new technologies come along, and we're suddenly able to see things in more detail that we couldn't see before, and old enigmas suddenly, that's how it might work. Yeah. I've always loved puzzles, and I get to solve puzzles all the day long.
Yeah. Invisible puzzles that are buried
absolutely
under the ground or on the ocean or everything else. So now we had a quake recently that was pretty dramatic. It was, we had one 2 years ago, I think that was even more damaging. But starting with you, Lori, what was your experience during the quake, and how did it unfold for you personally?
Well, I was sitting at my desk and I was working on my newspaper column. I write a column most weeks for the Times-Standard, and I was writing about the 1955 flood. Great, I get to jump into the 55 and then the 64 flood. I had it all mapped out when suddenly my phone goes off. Earthquake, earthquake, take cover, strong shaking coming. And about the time the message ended, I could feel a little bit of a wiggle, little bit. And about 6 seconds into it, the little bit got quite a bit stronger, But it wasn't terribly strong. I live in McKinleyville, and the house wasn't even creaking. And I get into the habit of counting the duration of shaking. And so by the time I got to about 30 seconds, it wasn't strong, as I said, but 30, I thought, well, that column's going on the shelf. I'm going to have to start all over. So I counted about 45 seconds, and then the hard work comes in, which is trying to figure out where was this? The very initial location put it on shore near Scotia, magnitude 6, and then it jumped offshore onto the Mendocino Fault. The reason there's a little confusion early on is we don't have that many seismic stations here, and we have none offshore. Okay. And so it takes a little while to get enough stations to really hone in and precisely locate it. So I'm actually on the phone, on the air with KMUD. Lauren Schmidt is wonderful.
Yeah, we've had her on the show.
And so I'm actually talking through this process of learning where the earthquake is, how big it is, as I'm on the air. And while we're on the air, we hear about the tsunami warning.
Yeah.
And that's probably a good place to kick it over to my colleague here.
Yeah, let's get your personal experience on where you were when the earthquake occurred. And then she talked a little bit about how we have stations around that kind of work to detect the shaking and give us a sense of where they're coming from. I know that there's a system like that on the oceans, but it's probably much broader in terms of like the whole Pacific Rim, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so for me, you were saying you're writing an article about 64, and we were just finishing an interview with Time Standard about 1964, and they just left, and it was only maybe 2 minutes later when the earthquake hit.
Yeah.
But for us, earthquake hit, and we counted over a minute and 20 seconds actually.
Now that's directly, real quick, that's directly tied to magnitude, right? Like the longer it goes is generally higher magnitude?
Essentially, yeah. So you can get an estimate, yeah. And so it was, most of it was that long rolling sensation. The Weather Service, we have these pilings that go deep into the ground, so we feel everything. So we could really feel the full length of the earthquake.
Yeah.
And at that point, we knew it was a big earthquake. We didn't know the magnitude. So we then waited to see what this National Tsunami Warning Center was going to say, and they were the ones then that made the decision that you were saying when everybody received the tsunami warning, the 7.3 first estimate. So at that point, then we had to go into response and what we were going to do there, and how to issue the warning and all the things that needed to go on from there. But yeah, that initial period there, it's waiting, it's counting, it's seeing like how long is this earthquake going to be. If it's 2 minutes long, at that point we know it's a huge earthquake and it's probably a tsunami generating one. Anything less than that, you start to get in that questionable size. So that's where we were. That's where we were at that moment.
Now, is that a decision that you guys make whether to issue the warning? Is there is it all based on subjective, analysis of what you've see, or is there like the Tsunami Warning Center tells you to issue a warning kind of thing?
Yeah, for most events, anything less, if it lasts for 2 full minutes, then we have a policy that we would go ahead and issue an alert.
Because there's no question
there's no question. This is a huge earthquake. We don't know what the magnitude is specifically, but it's got to be huge.
Yeah.
And you need to get away from the coast. In this case, where it's a little bit less, we don't have that ability at our office, but the National Tsunami Warning Center does. And so they were the ones that analyzed it and came up with the first initial estimate and then issued the warning for it. But anything above a 7.1, really it could produce a tsunami. So it was decent enough that the risk was there.
Now, so how does the National Tsunami Warning Center analyze data? Where does that data come from, and what are they looking at?
Yeah, they're looking at all the seismographs across the entire globe. It all comes into their system, and then they analyze it, and they write down. They basically line up everything, trying to determine, what they basically try to make it so all the seismographs line up, and then they can determine a magnitude. And once they have a magnitude and a location, they can determine the threat. So in this case, it was slightly off the coast.
Yeah.
It's where Cascadia is. It was a 7.3. It was within their range of where they would issue a warning, and so they went ahead and did that.
It better to be safe than sorry, right? I mean, that's always got to be the...
In that first initial estimate, you don't really know what type of mechanism. Was it a strike slip, a thrust earthquake, to give you that first estimate in the first moments. And they want to get the warning out within 5 minutes, so they have to do a lot of analysis.
They have to do that before the information's all in, right? So you mentioned the mechanism. Lori, Can you break down for us what the actual geophysical activity was that led to the shaking?
Well, here on the North Coast, the capital of earthquake activity in the lower 48 states, we have every type of earthquake you can imagine.
Okay.
So we have earthquakes that we call strike slip that move one side. They can either move this way or move that way, but like cars on a British or an American freeway, all of the motion is horizontal. And it turns out most of our historic earthquakes have been that type of mechanism. We call it strike slip.
Okay.
So that earthquake back in December of 2022, that was a strike slip earthquake. This was a strike slip earthquake, and it was on the Mendocino Fault, which is a fault very much like the San Andreas Fault. It is a fault and it is a plate boundary. So Earth's surface, back what I was first learning in that first geology class that I thought was so exciting back in 1966, we've got this understanding now of the basic Earth system, that because the Earth is still cooling down, heat is still coming out, rising, cold areas sinking down, it creates this mosaic of motion on the outermost surface, and we call those plates. So some plates are huge, like the Pacific Plate. Others are fairly small, like our little Gorda Plate. But they're all moving relative to one another, in some cases side by side, some cases spreading apart, like the Gorda Ridge offshore, and in some cases shoving together, like the Cascadia subduction zone. So most of our earthquakes in our relatively short wink of an eye historic time have been these strike slip earthquakes, and that was certainly the case on December 5th. The earthquake was centered roughly 40 miles off of Cape Mendocino. Mendocino Fault, many people might not have heard of it, is arguably the most active fault in the state of California. If we measure it in terms of how frequently we have a magnitude 4 or larger earthquake, we've had 200 4 or larger earthquakes since 1990 on the Mendocino Fault. It's probably a little higher than that now because that was calculated before this most recent set of earthquakes. So the Mendocino Fault, it's roughly 160 or so miles in length, heads due west off of Cape Mendocino. Fortunately, there's not a lot of land or people nearby. So certainly in the vicinity of Cape Mendocino, in this area we call the Triple Junction, which was responsible for those earthquakes back in 2021 and 2022. These earthquakes certainly have the potential to do a lot of damage, as we learned in 2022. But because the motion is horizontal, they are not nearly the tsunami threat that an earthquake that pushes up the sea floor would be.
Now that's interesting because there was a lot of aftershocks, it seemed like to me, after this recent quake. You mentioned something in the neighborhood of 500, I think?
Yeah, I just actually calculated it out today, went to the USGS website and carefully counted all of the earthquakes that we've had since December 5th, and it's just under 500. Now, most of those are magnitude 1s and 2s and 3s. We've had a handful of 4s, and our largest was a 5.3 back on December 14th, that a fair number of people in southern Humboldt, the Cape Mendocino area, felt. I didn't feel that one.
No, but you mentioned the Cascade or the subduction zone earthquakes, and we have one here famously, Cascadia subduction zone, which, from what I understand, every 300 to 500 years, there's usually a major event that occurs along that region, and we haven't had one in around 300 years, was the last I heard about it. And my question was, does this help relieve pressure on that and maybe ease off some of that burden? But you say no, it's a totally different fault system, so that is still looming out there in the future. Is that correct?
We have lots of faults that are quite capable of producing strong earthquakes. We're not likely to have another 7 on the section of the Mendocino Fault that ruptured on December 5th.
Okay.
But we could have a 7 a little further offshore, and we have plenty of faults in the offshore Gorda Plate that could produce a 7, 7.5 even. And then we have faults on land, and we have the big one, the Cascadia megathrust. The earthquake that happened on December 5th did not involve the subduction zone. It certainly tweaked the leading edge of the subduction zone, but that subduction zone fault is 650 miles long and extends inland for 50 or so miles. It's a huge lock zone that extends from Cape Mendocino all the way up to Vancouver Island, Canada. So this particular event probably made no difference, yes or no, in terms of loading it. However, as you mentioned, it's been over 300. It'll be 325 years since our last great Cascadia earthquake on January 26th. It's a big anniversary, which means that our next earthquake could happen at any time. Now, we know that the Cascadia subduction zone produces big earthquakes. Sometimes we go as long as 800 years between them.
Okay.
Sometimes as short as 180 years.
Okay.
So, it's not clockwork, but it's definitely coming. And it's something that I've become increasingly concerned about in recent years. I'm hoping that it waits till my part on the stage is over. But the good news is that we really do have the ability as individuals, as families, as businesses, as government, and not just government, it's got to take everybody else, to reduce the threats beforehand and make it through even that really big earthquake with relatively moderate as opposed to catastrophic damage.
On that, on that change of direction a little bit, Ryan, you watched the response to unfold in terms of you guys issued the warning for the tsunami. People evacuated Old Town area and other places, and it seemed pretty orderly. Obviously chaotic because it was an evacuation, and that seems like it's always going to be a little bit panicked. But how do you feel like it went? Where do you think we could probably do better? And what's the value from your perspective of seeing that kind of thing play out in real time rather than just a drill or something of that nature?
Yeah, you can just, we don't have to imagine, but for us it was, this earthquake that happened. You get the WIA, it goes off, okay, and then you feel the earthquake, and then 5 minutes later you're getting another alert, and then you get the alert from the county, and so there's a lot of stuff being thrown at you. So I understand people were getting nervous and scared, and I heard people running to get out of the tsunami zone, and so I don't blame anyone for any way that they responded. They did what they felt was right in the moment. And I think for us it's just a matter of learning from that situation and now say, okay, well, how can we do better next time?
Exactly. Right.
And so one of the big things that we learned and found out is that a lot of people didn't know where the zone the edge was. It's really not that far in a lot of areas. Like in Eureka, you really only have to go a few blocks and you're out of the tsunami zone. Not even all of Old Town is in the tsunami zone.
Okay.
So really don't have to go very far. Samoa has high ground, Manila has high ground, even Fairhaven now has high ground. So if you know where you're going and you know the evacuation route, you should be able to get there for the vast majority of places wwalking within about 10 minutes of the earthquake. So you should use the earthquake as your warning. We even found out during this situation, we activated the emergency alert system from our office, and it didn't go off for Humboldt County. And the reason was that the tower that activates it just didn't work because it was in the earthquake zone where the power went out, and the generator didn't turn on, right? Everyone else got a WIA, so we got it in different ways. We got it from the county, right? And so having multiple ways of receiving the alert is really important. But for a local event, it's the earthquake that's your warning. We're talking about 7.0 in this situation, right? And that knocked out one of the systems, right? Imagine if we had the 8.5 or something bigger.
Exactly right.
So using the earthquake as your warning is really important, and just start your evacuation. If it ends up not being a real event, okay, you just can go back and you can be back to your home or wherever you need to go. within a few minutes. But if it is a real event, you've already made it to safety. You know, when in doubt, drill it out. That's our biggest thing.
Yeah.
And then knowing the evacuation routes and practicing it ahead of time is really important. If you know it in the moment, you're going to respond right.
Yeah.
And not go too far. You know, you don't need to go all the way up to Humboldt Hill, for instance.
Yeah.
In that scenario, you just need to get out of the zone.
Now, is there a website people can go to kind of see what the zones are to sort of familiarize themselves?
Yeah, the Redwood Coast Tsunami Work Group's website is great resource. It has all the maps on there. There's also a California Geological Survey GIS map where you can click on that and then zoom right into your, it goes down to the street view, where you can see if your house is in the zone or not in the zone, where you work is in the zone, or also where you recreate. Knowing all of those things is really important, and having a plan for all those different scenarios.
Yeah, because you don't know where you're going to be when it strikes.
You never know.
Lori, we've got about 2.5 minutes left. Time flies when we're having fun. But I mean, you mentioned that we can get it to where we are surviving, even with maybe even only moderate damage if we plan and prepare ahead. What does that look like to you? And can we refer people to? I mean, one of the things that I've been referring people to is earthquake.ca.gov as a place that has sort of advice. But how can people get better prepared in order to preserve the likelihood of survival?
Well, we fortunately just finished our total revision of our Living on Shaky Ground magazine about 5 months ago. It is available all over the county, all over the North Coast. You can find it at the Weather Service office. You can find it at most government offices. You can find it at libraries. Anyone can call the geology department at Humboldt and request that a copy be sent to them. It's a great publication that gives you the background on why we have earthquakes, but more importantly, a step-by-step way to make you and your family safe, how to reduce the kinds of hazards that might fall or trip you, how to talk to your children. Very important that you involve your whole family in preparing. How you can put together an emergency kit and what you should consider to have in your home. Biggest issue here on the North Coast, and it doesn't take an earthquake, floods can do it, power outages can do it, is cut us off from one another and from markets and gasoline and all those things that we count on for our daily lives. Everyone who lives on the North Coast should be prepared to be on their own for 2 weeks. Your home is probably safe unless you're in the tsunami zone. And the tsunami zone, as Ryan said, is surprisingly small in most of Humboldt County. So get the magazine and talk to your family. It can actually be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for joining us. I appreciate it. And thank you guys for watching. That's it for this week. I think some important information was conveyed tonight. So thank you for that. Stay tuned. Stay informed.